Like so much of business, inventing retail products is all about the math. At the end of the day, it's great to invent something someone can use, and it's great to have it on a store shelf. But if it's not making people money, it won't stay there long. So we have to figure out at the very beginning of this process whether this great new invention of yours has any possibility that it'll be profitable. To do that, we have to understand what we call the retail equation. It's a math problem that we have to master, and we have to run every new invention against to see where the profit lies. So let's look at this math problem. As you can see, there's a few steps to it. This is a screenshot of an actual calculator that I use all the time. It tells me whether or not there's profit to be had in this product. Understand, you're not going to know to the penny all of these values, but you have to get as close as you can to make this model give you a correct result. That means sometimes you've got to do your homework. So let's take a look at the problem itself. As you can see, it's broken down into three parts. It starts with the part on the left, goes to the part on the right, and ends at the part in the middle. Let me explain. Here's section 1. In section 1, we're talking about just these four items. The manufacturer's cost, which is what we call the dock price. It's the amount that you could purchase it from the manufacturer for if you walked out of their back door. The display cost, pretty simple, it's the cost of your display divided by the number of units it holds. Because this is a per unit calculation, you have to decide what the burden per piece is going to be against the overall price. In this case, you can see that our manufacturing cost was $1.15. Our display cost was 10 cents per unit. And now we move to our freight, tariffs, and taxes. If you make it in America, you're still going to have taxes and freight. You just won't have tariffs. If you make it overseas, you'll have to calculate the freight, tariffs, and taxes against your product. In this example, we've added 5 cents or a nickel to the cost of our displayed product to cover the freight, tariffs, and taxes on that one unit. And then, of course, there's fulfillment. Fulfillment is that part between the factory and the retailer. It's all of those mechanisms that have to be accomplished in order to move your product from the factory into the retailer's distribution point. It may include things like paying the bills, collecting the payments, moving the freight, product liability insurance. Any of those things could fall into fulfillment. So in this particular example, we're going to assign 15% of the $1.30, which is our freight, tariffs, and taxes price, and we're going to call that our fulfillment cost. That's going to add 20 cents per unit to our total cost, giving us a fulfilled cost of $1.50. We have all this information and we know what our fulfilled cost is. It's $1.50 per unit. Now let's go to the other end of the equation. In this end of the equation, we stop everything we've been doing and we have to go look in the market. You may have heard me talk about market audits. Market audits are the process that we use for figuring out what the price the consumer will be willing to pay for our product. It has nothing to do with how much we've paid to manufacture it or our fulfilled price or anything else. MSRPs are built on what the market will bear. That's it. The market tells you how much they're willing to pay for your product, and you are forced to listen. So we conduct a market audit, and we find in this example that the average MSRP for like products or comparables is $3.99. That's awesome. $3.99 is what we know the consumer is willing to pay. The profit, that's the money in our pocket. I'll show you how we calculate that in just a second. The retailer profit, that's a 100% margin. So we have two different numbers here. We have a retailer profit, which represents a 100% margin, or what we call a keystone, And then we have the retailer net profit, which represents a 50% margin. Now we go to the center section of this equation. In the center section of this equation, we're talking about three things that are going to adjust our price even more: sales commissions, sales discounts, and inventor royalties. Now, if you look at the far end of this, that $1.99 sell-in price, that's the amount of money we're selling our product to the retailer for. As you can see, it's roughly half of the $4 market value. That's because as a placeholder, and of course it's different with different products and it's different with different retailers, but as a placeholder, you can safely cut the MSRP in half and use that to calculate your sell-in price. That's always going to be your base target for sell-in. In this case, basically $2, because the market will carry $4. We look at the sales commissions. In order to have proper salespeople who know what they're doing and are good at what they're doing, you're going to have to pay them. They're going to make anywhere from 5% on the low end to 10% or 15% on the high end. Be prepared for it. Plug that number in. In this particular example, we didn't put anything in there. Sales discounts are things that buyer is going to force you into. So you ever seen those really great products on the end of the shelf? Yeah, they didn't get there by accident. Those companies paid to put them on the end caps. If you want your product in the center of the shelf where it's eye level, you're going to pay for that. You ever open up a Sunday newspaper and you see the circular advertising all those retail products? Yeah, you guessed it. Not the retailer. The guy who owned the product paid for that advertisement. These are all things that we consider sales discounts. So they could be anywhere from 3% up to 10%. And it's 3 to 10% off the sell-in price. And then, of course, inventor royalty. As an inventor yourself, you're hoping some other company is paying you this royalty. But the fact of the matter is, you may have to pay it to someone else in order to get your product on the shelf because maybe you used one of their technologies. A great example of that is a modern smartphone. A modern smartphone has $150 per phone worth of technology royalties in it. Royalties that they have to pay the patent holders that hold the technology that allows them to build the smartphone. $150 of the cost of your phone went to inventor royalties. We take all of those things, sales commissions, sales discounts, and inventor royalties, they're all a percentage of that sell-in price. So if I have a sell-in price of $1.99 and I'm paying a 10% sales commission, that's 20 cents. Same with inventor royalty. And that starts to erode the profitability in the product. If I take a look at this on the larger scale, back to our full view of the equation, I can see that I manufactured the part for $1.15. I added 10 cents for the cost of the display. That brought me to $1.25. I added 5 cents for the cost of freight, tariffs, and taxes, and that brought me to $1.30. And I added 15% to cover my fulfillment costs. That brought me to $1.50. Now, I didn't add any sales commissions, I didn't add any sales discounts, and I didn't add any inventor royalties. For the total cost of my product is $1.50 per unit. So if I take a look at the way my math works out so far, my manufacturing cost was $1.15. I added 10 cents for the cost of my display. I added 5 cents for the cost of my freight, tariffs, and taxes. And I added 15% or 20 cents for the cost of my fulfillment. Now I have a total cost of $1.50 per unit, which is what it cost me to land this product at my warehouse. Now I'm going to go to the other end of the equation. I've calculated my MSRP at $3.99. I take that $3.99 and I divide it in half and I get roughly my sell-in price of $1.99. I didn't add any sales commission, which would be highly unlikely. I didn't add any sales discounts, which would be moderately unlikely. and I didn't add any inventor royalty, which could really go either way. That let me keep the total cost of my product at $1.50. Well, from there, the profit's pretty easy to calculate. It cost me $1.50 for my product. I'm selling it for $1.99. That's basically 50 cents in profit, or 33%. Now, what's odd about this? There's no sales commission. If I added 10% in for sales commission, I would go to 23% profit. If I had to add another 2 or 3% in for discounts and maybe 6% for an inventor royalty, before you know it, this product just mathematically isn't worth taking to the market. You would be amazed at how many products end up that way. Good products, well designed, well developed, and very expensively patented. When you put them against this test, because this is the ultimate mathematical test, they don't measure up. You can't make them cheap enough, you can't sell them cheap enough, or the customer simply isn't willing to pay enough for them. Before you start to invest too much money in your product, you take a rough stab at this. You take these equations and try and do the math the best you can. See if you're even in the ballpark. And if you are, then maybe move forward. But if you aren't, maybe time to look for another product.